Welcome back to The Right Angle, the podcast for fantasy readers, writers, and anyone who loves a good story. Hi, I'm Autumn.
And I'm Adrienne. In this episode, we've brought a very special, very beloved returning guest, my sister, Reagan Nicole. She recently finished the fourth draft of her novel, When the Sun Met the Stars, and we're here to question her about everything. How she got started with reading and writing, her experience with dyslexia as a writer, and so much more.
We are so incredibly excited to have Reagan back, but at this point we might have some new listeners who aren't as familiar with Reagan. If you haven't, please go listen to her first episode. It was amazing. But for those who don't know, Reagan, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, I'm Reagan Nicole. As you heard, I'm a writer, but I'm also an artist and a lover of all things fantasy and storytelling.
All right, so we're going to jump right into some questions. So, Reagan, how long have you been reading and writing?
This is kind of a hard question for me to answer because I feel like I've been writing pretty much my entire life. Reading is a different story, however. I didn't actually like reading for most of my life. I got a lot more into writing around the 7th grade when I started writing a 5-book series of all about dragons, kind of based on the Wings of Fire series by T. Sutherland.
So you kind of mentioned already, but what inspired you to get into writing?
Well, there's really not a specific thing that inspired me to start writing. I have been doing it for as long as I can remember. It started off writing small little stories about my stuffed animals and grew to writing full fantasy novels. One of the first stories I ever wrote was about my stuffed animals, and I actually had my sister write it for me because I was not very good at writing. So I sat on our couch while she wrote on the computer.
To clarify, that sister was me, and I have no recollection of this, but that's okay.
You mentioned your 5-book fantasy series. Is that your most recent one?
No, it's not. I have started writing a full fantasy novel since then.
Okay, tell us about that one then, since it's your most recent.
My most recent project is a fantasy novel that's set in a world where one kingdom is trapped within a magical barrier and the other one is falling apart because of the magic used to create it. The crown princess of the trapped kingdom is kidnapped by the son of the people who cast the spell and taken outside the barrier for the first time in her life. It follows the two as they try to reverse what was done by their ancestors and possibly falling in love along the way.
That's so cute. So, fun fact for the listeners, me and Adrienne actually have had the opportunity to read a little bit of this, and I love it. It's so cool. So I'm really curious as to kind of where you got the inspiration for this. Like, how did you start writing?
This one is kind of an interesting story because I didn't actually just come up with the idea. I was writing a different story that I wasn't very passionate about, and I knew that I wanted to write a big project next. So I just opened a blank doc and just started writing the first thing that came to my mind. I went to Pinterest a lot for inspiration, and it just kind of snowballed into what it is today.
That's super cool.
So when did you start the journey of writing this novel then?
I started this in April of 2024, which was about 2 years ago now.
Okay, you started it 2 years ago, basically. So what was the timeline for finishing it? So, like, when did you finish your first draft, roughly? And, like, how... Basically, I'm asking, how long did it take you to complete each draft?
Well, I finished the first draft around January of 2025. And then I've been editing and sending it to beta readers and just more editing since then.
That's nice. Editing takes a while. That's one of the probably the longest things, especially when working on like a full-length novel. So I admire you for sticking with it, especially for, I think you said 4 drafts, which is, oh my goodness.
So going off of that, what have been the most challenging parts of writing this novel, or like really challenging scenes of writing this really big project?
I would say one of the most challenging scenes to write would probably be the fight scenes, just because pacing is hard. Another hard scene to write is probably the romance scenes, because lack of experience and just because it's hard to make it look natural and genuine.
I really agree with you on that, on both aspects of it. I think pacing is definitely one of those things that is a feel. Like it's hard to judge it when you're writing it, and so that's one reason I was like having other people read it, because they are very aware of how naturally the pacing feels, where I think as a writer it can be a little bit hard. And then romance just in general is very hard to not make sound cheesy, and so I commend you for both.
Yeah, I haven't undertaken trying to write a full-length novel in a very long time, and I probably never will. So I can't really speak to those, but definitely sounds hard from this perspective. So, what have been the most challenging parts since finishing the drafts?
The most challenging part has definitely been editing. Editing will forever be difficult and annoying.
What is difficult about it?
Probably the hardest part for me is going at a much slower pace and less controlled, because when I was just writing it, I had a set 1,000 words a day, but when editing, it's hard to keep motivated and set specific goals for it.
I know you mentioned that you use beta readers for your different drafts, so could you explain kind of what a beta reader is, and as well as like the helpful feedback you've gotten from them and how you've applied that?
Well, a beta reader is pretty much just anyone who reads the novel who's not like being paid or anything. They just kind of read it and offer feedback. I've had a lot of beta readers who offer feedback of like the overarching story that are really helpful, and I've changed a lot about it. But for me, I really enjoy hearing the positive feedback, because it kind of helps to fight the writer's block and let me know that everything I write isn't horrible and terrible.
Is there any like specific comment you ever got from someone that like you remember and you remember vividly, and that just gave you a lot to go off of?
There was one comment from one of my teachers who I hand wrote a little portion of it out and gave it to her to read and review, and she put sticky notes on it, and it was talking about one of my characters who was a queen at this point, and it referred to her as that. And she just put "queen" in all caps is right with an arrow to it. I thought it was so funny and absolutely love it. It is currently hanging, it is attached to my computer, and I just keep it there at all times because I love it so much.
That's very sweet. I love that. So then, what is the most exciting part of the post-writing process?
The most exciting part has definitely been having my beta readers read it and just having it finally be seen by other people after it's only been in my head for so long.
I know Autumn and I can both relate to that. Our last episode, season 3, episode 5, we read through some of our own works, some of which have never been seen before by anyone else, and that was a really exciting process to get to read them and talk about them. So you did give us a very brief synopsis of kind of what the plot of the book is, but can you tell us more about what it's about and some of the nitty-gritty details and the characters and everything about it?
Well, some of my favorite aspects about my novel are, first of all, my main character, Rivette. She's just what I love to see for women in books. She has a good balance of being feminine, I think. She loves dresses, and she's a dreamer, and she's a little bit of a weirdo, which I love her for.
That's actually something very similar to what we discussed in our episode this season about female main characters, that it is very difficult to find that right balance, and that's why there are so many poorly written ones in media that we talked about. So if you want to learn more about that, check out that episode.
Another thing that I really like experimenting with is the contrast from that main character to my other main character, the male main character, Ashrin. He's a lot more serious and was raised in a completely different environment from her. And he's also kind of fascinated by the way her brain works, which I just love experimenting with.
That's awesome. I also want to ask more about the world building aspect of it. What gave you this idea, or can you go into more details about this world that is trapped in a bubble almost?
Well, it actually didn't start as being in a bubble. It just started as a wall, but then I decided to kind of build this separation from the two kingdoms even more, and it kind of snowballed into creating a whole nother history, which is probably going to get a second book. The world building is probably one of my favorite parts, because everything that their world is now is because of what their ancestors did. The male main character's ancestors were a famous set of 5 sisters, the Solero sisters. They were gifted with a type of magic, but their magic came at a very heavy price. So their kingdom was currently at war with the other kingdom. These 5 sisters were all queens of the same kingdom. They decided that they were going to use their magic to trap the other kingdom to effectively end the war. But their magic was actually a curse, and it resulted in their world being destroyed more thoroughly than they ever destroyed the other kingdom.
Yeah, that is really cool. So how does that history kind of relate to what is happening in the story currently then? You said in the synopsis that they're trying to undo this curse, basically. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more and how those two relate to each other almost?
Yeah, so they're trying to undo the curse that the sisters did, but also the very youngest of the Solero sisters, she was opposed to making it. She used her own magic to tether herself to the world so that she could come back to the ancestor of the kingdom of the royal line from the kingdom that she trapped, because she was in love with their prince while she was alive. The youngest sister is now trying to guide my female main character to finding all of the different relics from the magic so that they can reunite them and that they can finally get rid of the barrier and reverse the corruption.
That's so cool. And from what I've read, I can definitely tell that that is so richly woven into this story.
So Autumn and I know from talks that we've had with you before that you are getting a physical copy of this draft so that beta readers can read it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that all works?
So I had the idea to do this because in my last set of beta readers, I had a lot of people who didn't finish just because they hated reading on computers. So I thought it would be really cool if I could not only have it printed out, but have it printed out like a physical book. I got a very cool cover design from one of my teachers, her younger sister, who is a college student. She designed the most beautiful cover for me that I plan on using for it. I'll be using Lulu Printing to get the book printed just like a regular published book.
That is really cool, and I, for one, am very excited to read it. And we will be posting this very cool cover art that was designed by Rachel Mays on our Instagram so that everyone can see it.
There's this common idea that when we're writing nowadays, because there's so much out there, there's so many different just things that we look at and see and consume on the daily, that it's really, really hard to create a very original story without having inspiration from something. And I know this is true of my story, that there's definitely inspiration I've pulled from my favorite movies, books, TV shows. So, Reagan, what is some inspiration, whether it be from books or authors, that inspired this writing as well as just your writing in general?
Well, for just writing in general, the first thing that comes to mind is the Wings of Fire series by Tui T. Sutherland. I wrote, as I mentioned before, a 5-book series all about dragons that was very much inspired by that book. And it was through writing that writing truly became a true passion for me. Another one would be Harry Potter. I loved those book series when I was younger. Those books definitely got me more into reading, which in turn got me more into writing. For my novel, I'm sure I subconsciously take inspiration from all kinds of books and movies, but the main one I can think about is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. It's a very fairy tale-esque story.
I also really love that book series, so that's very exciting. So then, Reagan, would you say that reading is different for you now that you're a more experienced writer? I know for Autumn that's definitely true, and I know for me with music, I definitely am super critical of songs or new pieces that I hear because there's so much more context of both writing music and studying it for so long. So is that also true for you after writing such an incredible work?
Reading has definitely changed for me since I got more into writing. Just like you said, I kind of pick it apart a lot more and see different ways and structures that they're using and kind of wonder how I can bend these tropes or whatever they're doing into my own stories. It also works for movies. I often, while I'm watching a movie, I'll just be writing it in my head pretty much and seeing if I can capture this super specific feeling or scene or whatever it is.
So Reagan has dyslexia, and we want to know more about how that's impacted you just in regular life and in writing. So for our first question, I want you to tell us kind of about your journey with dyslexia. How was it when you were a child in grade school, middle school, and high school? Can you just tell us a bunch about that?
Not so much anymore, but it definitely affected me a lot when I was younger. I remember I had this one teacher who just did not realize how much I was struggling, and she kind of saw it like when I was struggling, I was purposely not trying as hard. And I remember I went home early, like almost every day from school, because she made me so upset, because she made me feel like I was a bad kid for not understanding things like everyone else did. Since then, I think I found a way of working around the way that my brain works, or not working around so much, more working with it. It's hard for me to give specific examples because my brain has always been like this, and I've never known what it's like without it. Because of my dyslexia, I know that I do have to study a lot more than my peers do. And I sometimes have to relearn things a little bit different because some teachers just don't teach it in a way that really works for me. There is a very small thing that I do that I recently found out was related to dyslexia, and that's struggling with left and right. I found my own way of coping with this with my bracelets that I wear. I have a watch on my left and I have other bracelets on my right, so anytime I need to know left from right, I can just look down at them. I recently learned that that was because people with dyslexia struggle with automaticity, the ability to do something automatically without thinking, such as figuring out your left and rights.
So I know we've talked about the difficulties of having dyslexia. Would you say that there are any benefits or like superpowers or strengths that you've found come with it?
I would definitely say there is. I have learned recently that dyslexia is a full different way of thinking. It's not just struggling with a few words here and there, but this new way of thinking also results in people being very creative and kind of seeing things a little bit differently. That definitely help with writing, especially, in my opinion.
Another important aspect, like the most important aspect of dyslexia, arguably, is the spatial awareness, or being able to see in 3D in different ways. So the reason that people with dyslexia have a harder time reading is because their brains are wanting to turn the letters around and see it from different sides, which is why they move and why they turn. So I can definitely say this. Reagan is also, in addition to being a very creative writer and a wonderful writer, she is an amazing artist and has been for as long as I can remember.
Another very cool aspect of writing is that I am able to kind of affect my physical body just like using my brain. So I can hold out my hand and imagine there's something on my hand, and I start to feel the weight as if it's actually there. I remember once I was writing this scene in my novel where my main character was very, very tired. Like, she was enchanted so that she was so tired. And after writing that scene, I could barely keep my eyes open, even though I had not been tired before writing it at all. And once one of my characters got stabbed in the side, I didn't feel like I got stabbed, but it felt weird on my side, exactly where my character got stabbed, because I was describing her pain so vividly.
My final, I guess, 2 questions for you are, what would you say to teachers of students with dyslexia and to the students of dyslexia themselves? Because you've overcome dyslexia in a very unique way where you love to read now and you love to write, but that's not the case for a lot of people with dyslexia. So what would you say to those teachers and students to encourage them, or do you have anything you would like to say?
To any teachers who have students that are dyslexic, I just encourage you to try your best to understand that their brains might work a little differently, and I would hope that you kind of meet them where they are. I know I have one teacher who I adore who has 2 students in this one class with dyslexia, me being one of them, and she found a font called Open Dyslexia that is specifically made for dyslexic people, and she changed the daily writing prompts to match that font so that it was easier for us to read. And just even that little bit just went a long ways for us. Now, to any students who are struggling, whether you have a great teacher or you have a terrible one, it is probably going to be difficult, and you may have to put in a little more work than all of your fellow peers. But you can learn everything everyone else does. It just might take a little more.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us, Reagan. Your insight in both your novel and dyslexia is so fascinating. And I just love any chance I get to talk to you and hear about what you're working on, because I love it. I am so excited to read some more. Like, so excited. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you on again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy being on this podcast, and I also can't wait for you to read my book. And hopefully one day, in not too far into the future, all of the listeners can also read it when it's published.
Absolutely. They better. Well, thank you all so much for listening. That's it from The Right Angle, where we know the real magic of books is for everyone. Readers, writers, and all those in between.
Until next time, write boldly, read unapologetically,
and stay weird.